And so I'll say a few words about what we've been doing with some of the previous workshops and what the goals for the program are in the future. And then I'll introduce Dennis Dean, and he will talk about platform-enabled BioCompute objects with some use cases, and we'll have some Q&A and discussion built into that. So hopefully we'll be able to. Just a quick seminar note, since this is open to the public, FDA personnel will be allowed to ask questions and make suggestions. The GW team who's organizing the event will allow them to speak and so forth. Other participants will not be able to, but we still want to be able to hear from everybody. So we are encouraging people to put in their comments and questions on Easy Retro. This link, unfortunately, we'll have to update this link because it looks like WebEx is blocking that link. But Easy Retro is going to be something like this, where you can put in a question or a comment or a suggestion, and we'll monitor this in case there's anything that you would like to have asked during the presentation, and we can ask it to Dennis for you. Again, unfortunately, WebEx is suspicious of the shortened version here, so one of the BioCompute team will just put in the full link as soon as they are able to get that. And one final note, this is being recorded, just so that you're aware. Okay, so, oops, let me move the presentation window here. Okay, so the major issue that BioCompute addresses is clear communication of computational pipelines. Questions like, what is the purpose of the pipeline? What is the context of the experiment? What are you hoping to get out of it? What exactly was done at every step in atomic detail? What was the environment that the workflow was carried out in, and with what dependencies? What parameters were used? What kind of data was being used, and how is it transformed? What are the limitations to the pipeline? These kinds of questions. Workflows are often very complicated, and they can be difficult to explain to outside parties. But these kinds of questions really help someone to understand an analysis. And it's kind of a nebulous problem that a lot of people have struggled to put words to, just sort of by its nature and by the fact that it tends to be very ad hoc, where you get into a problem and you figure out what you are doing, and then finally at the end you look back and say, all right, what did I do? And then you have to write it all down afterwards and try and help somebody understand. So it's a big problem, and it's kind of been a difficult one for a lot of people to put words to, but it's one that Raja Mazumdar and Vahan Simonyan identified as far back as about 2012 as a major impediment. And they both worked very hard to systematize the way that we approach this problem. And it's been a really big issue in a lot of places, not least of which here in academia. But one of the places that it's felt the most concretely is at the FDA, where Vahan worked at the time. And so oftentimes what happens is a sponsor will submit something, and if it has one of these computational analyses, it'll frequently have to be kicked back to the industry sponsor with a need for clarification of some sort. They'll have to interpret those comments and then resubmit with what they feel addresses those comments. And that may or may not be enough, and so they may have to go around multiple times, and that can draw out the process by months and months and millions of dollars just to be able to get the reviewers enough information to make a decision. So it's very, very inefficient. The problem of simply telling someone what you did has been a much bigger problem than it's really gotten credit for. And so there's been a really big need to find some way of outlining exactly what needs to be communicated in order for someone to really understand, and how that information needs to be represented. And so it's sort of it's a very nebulous problem, because there's a huge amount of information related to the computational analysis, which until now has been very ad hoc. You sort of leave it to someone else to come up with a mental checklist of what they think is really important to help someone understand, and that's usually insufficient. So you can sort of imagine it like a citation, maybe, for example. So if you are writing a research paper and there's no guidelines for what you need to include for your references, you might include the author, you might include the title, and what else would you include? Would you include the page numbers? Would you include the city where it was published? These kinds of things. And so BioCompute provides structure for all of that data so that it can be made sense of in an understandable way. So it standardizes what needs to be there and exactly what way that data needs to be represented, so that it's both human and machine readable. And so one of the nice things about it being machine readable is that you can then represent that data in whatever way you want. And so this is one example of that. So this is a collapsible version where you can sort of collapse away the stuff you don't care about, and you're only focused on the stuff that you do care about. Or you could take two of these reports side by side, for example, to see what's different and how one person did it differently. Um, a lot of great things you can do once a standard like this is in place. Was then a research fellow in medicine at Harvard. He's now a principal investigator at SevenBridges Genomics, where he works on data analysis, translational science, and analytics, and has multiple collaborations, including with the FDA, as well as Million Veteran Program through Veteran Affairs, and several pharmaceutical and other private companies. So with that, Dennis, it's all yours.
So hello, everyone. I have to say, um, collaborating with the GW team and having these conversations about biocompute objects at the FDA has been a lot of fun and very important. Let me just share my screen. So let me share screen number 3. And let me just start up my presentation. Okay, so all ready to go. So thank you, GW, for inviting me. My only regret on this presentation that we're not able to do it in person. I look forward to working more closely with you as things begin to open up. So the goal of today's talk is to really present how we think about biocompute objects from a platform perspective and really show you what we've been doing over the last year to update our biocompute object tool. And then I also want to present 2 use cases that are really works in progress to discuss where we're going and also what some of the challenges are. One of the best things about the BioCompute workshops has been the ability to have conversations offline or during discussions or during panels. So I'm going to aim to take breaks in between the talk, either to take questions or to have a discussion with any of the BioCompute or FDA team. So I want to start very quickly with a motivation and then tell you what we're doing on our platform. We have multiple platforms. I'll explain that in a second to make generating biocompute objects easier. And then there's 2 use cases I want to talk about. One is the reuse of machine and deep learning applications, especially in cancer or precision medicine. We see these growing. And then the second is most of our um, users have some type of portability and interoperability use case. So I'm just going to introduce one, but hopefully I can just give you the idea of the types of things we see as emerging. And then lastly, like most people who present, most of the work is done by my team, so I want to make sure that I give the credit where the credit is due. So motivation. So this is one of my favorite slides if you look at the biocompute literature. And the idea here is for experimentalists have incredible detail on how they document their experiments. However, bioinformatics does not. And I think really the goal here is how do we um, expand the capacity of bioinformatics and analytics so we have the same type of rigor as experimentalists. Um, and bioinformatics is slightly different in that you can have all the analytics the same, but you have often hundreds of parameters, if not thousands sometimes, that you can tweak, and tweaking in the wrong direction can lead to wrong results. So this idea of the span of reproducibility or appropriate parameters is really important. And this is something we should be thinking about whenever we share these really advanced computations. Um, so I really love the design of the biocompute object. So I'm going to do the introduction in a slightly different perspective. The idea was to get and reach a wide range of stakeholders. And the idea was that we're going to make it really simple to start and then expand out. So on the right are the fields that Jonathan explained, but these are text fields. So we literally could start well before the standard was formalized to document uh, and test out the standard. And on the left is the example of a BioCompute object. Back in my day when I did computing, this would be fine for me. These days, it's a little challenging for me to look through large text files. So really what we want to think about from a platform perspective is how do we make it easier for our platform users to use biocompute objects? And if you look at the um, colored boxes on the bottom in the right figure, it'll kind of lead you on how we're thinking. Um, so I'm a big fan of vision. So this is kind of how we're thinking about biocompute objects from the SevenBridges perspective. So on the left side, I have supported use cases, then primary inputs. On the upper right, I talk about biocompute apps and then outputs. And I think all of these are important. I won't go through them in a lot of details, but to say that um, the green is what we're working on, gray is existing, and then proposed. For example, although we have a general purpose tool, we see biocompute objects expanding to support specific use cases. And so image processing and machine learning are examples of that. The other thing we want to talk about is how people work. Like Jonathan said, we want people to think about biocompute objects, or even if you don't like the name, right? Let's say you're not a fan, we want people to think about how they document their analyses for reuse. So it's really important to think about how people work. So what we're seeing is an increase in use of text-based editing for workflows. So not we love our interface, so we can design workflows with our interface, but we're seeing more and more groups and in commercial across academia saying they want to do Git enabled um, software development. And the key point is to do it well, we believe we have to have unit tests, which is in the center here. And then to ensure that we're interoperable, we need to be able to make sure and actually test that we can execute on the cloud and some local environment. That could be an HPC, it could be a small computer, but the idea is that we have to explicitly test, and then we can use all of this information within the BCO to document the process. So that's kind of how I'm thinking in the big picture. Now I want to drill down a little bit and talk about how we think about generating BCOs on our platform. Before I do that, what I need to do also is just tell you a little bit about our platforms. At Seven Bridges, we actually have multiple platforms. I'm going to talk about the Cancer Genomics Cloud because it's funded by the NCI. It's publicly available. So if anyone wanted to try it, you could. I'm also using the public platforms because I am able to talk about all the use cases. We have similar use cases for our commercial customers. The difference is they tend to be much more complicated. And so being able to address issues in the public platforms, I think, is a good stepping stone towards addressing the needs of commercial customers and potentially the customers or the people who will be doing submissions to the FDA. So with that introduction, I'm going to go a little bit faster on the platform. So the neat thing about the Cancer Genomics Cloud is that it has lots of data, 3 petabytes of data associated with it, and it's really built to collaborate in a distributed fashion on bioinformatics and analysis projects. This is just a snapshot of changes or additions since the TCGA pilot project and then the NCI cloud project, which the CGC is one of them. So since about 214, we've had regular additions, and it doesn't even go up to what we've added the last 2 years. So the benefit is co-localizing data or large data sets with computation. Um, The other thing that we do on our platforms is we have access to large amount of tools. So there's over 400 tools available, and you could see visual editor animating on the right. Basically, all our tools tend to be written in common workflow language, which allows us really to schedule cloud computation easily. We also have support for Jupyter Notebooks. We have an expert staff. I jumped over this, but on the left side, we also have interactive tools, APIs that help a wide range of users, from beginners to experts. So if you take one thing about the platform for this discussion, I believe, is that I think it's really important for us to own our CWL-centric view of the world. This is what allows us to distribute computation. It allows us to share tools. Um, and it's built on two components. One is Docker, so basically ways to share tools, and then common workflow language, a way to link these all together and to do computation automatically. The important part of this is that this allows us to document every step of a computation. So this way, the computation is reproducible, and every aspect and every version is automatically logged. So the question is, can we use BCOs to reuse this information? So to just summarize from the platform viewpoint, what I really want to talk about is BioCompute Object operational usability, and then really how do we integrate with the distributed infrastructure? Now, I'm pretty techie and my team is pretty techie, but we start everything pretty simply. So we actually use Word templates to first document BioCompute objects. So this is just a template, one of our original approaches to creating BioCompute objects, and we found this really helpful. The other thing we started doing is developing tools to help work with BioCompute objects. So what we're seeing here are our toolkits for generating BioCompute objects and extracting information from the CWL. And these are all publicly available. So that gives you the overview. Now what I want to do is tell you about how we actually generate BioCompute objects. And I'm going to show you basically two use cases. The first use case is working directly from the CWL. And I should say I'm showing the example from our platform, but you could actually run our tools in your local environment and select either text or CWL to create a BioCompute object. So here's the splash screen for our BCO app. We're really proud, or I should say I'm really proud of my team who put the app together as part of the Precision FDA Challenge. We're proud that we were selected as the best app. Since that, we've made many changes and enhancements. So I'll go over the stuff pretty quickly that we've presented before and show you the new stuff that we've added. So basically, generating a BCO is a 6-step process, and I'll quickly go through the steps so you get a feel for what happens. So step one, you actually select the platform. So you could actually select one of our available platforms, and you have to authenticate. This is changing a little bit as we become more integrated, but you choose the projects, and then once you choose the projects, any of the workflows that are available on those projects show up. So it's pretty easy to select. Part two is starting to add the provenance information. We're really proud of the visualizations. So these visualizations are generated on the fly and allows you to get a sense of what the workflow does. And you can also edit, although this information is pre-populated, you could edit the information. The second is the execution domain. Once again, these are automatically filled. And this is just an information about the executor. Going through to the description domain, if you look down at the bottom, there's a lot of details about the parameters that we automatically collect. So all this information goes straight into the BCO. And then this is just a bigger view so you can see it. And then if we look at the input-output domain, we actually record all the informations about inputs and outputs, including dates and times, which then allows us to really document the CWL. We thought a lot about how we make this information available, so we can actually make the BCO available as a JSON object, export it as a PDF. I'll show that in a minute. We can upload it to one of our platforms, or we can push to GitHub. Like I mentioned before, we really believe the GitHub link will be very useful, especially for collaborations. So I want to go through uh, one or two use cases very quickly. So same thing, except this time we're going to use a task that's already been completed. And so what's really nice about this is potentially the simplest use case of a regulatory submission. We have this result, and we want to show all the data, and we want to collect all the task information. And I'll go you through it again a little faster because it's the same steps. So we're going to document a run with this workflow. It's an RNA-seq workflow. Once again, the right here, the inputs and outputs, if you look on the right, the exact access time of the file is there. And if you look very closely at the generated BCO, there's a checksum. So there's a way to double check and work backwards in time to make sure nothing has changed. So this is the first step in reproducibility, but it's also built into the BCO standard. You can see the checksum a little bigger here. And then publishing, as I mentioned, to a Git page, we think is really going to be the way to go. Clearly we didn't originate this. This is examples from the BCO website. Um, I'm really proud of this document. We wanted to start thinking about usability, so we actually generate a PDF automatically, or we can, with all the BCO information, and this allows someone to look at the data offline or to search and query. But clearly a first step in usability, and integrated within the app are these, is a help. So we go through you can click on each of the domains to get information about what is expected. So this is our interactive help. And then one more use case, and this is our latest edition. We realize we love our platform interface, but it's not great for everyone. And then not everyone can code. So we now have the ability to create customizable interfaces, and we calling them SevenBridges apps. And so we now have a BCO app available on all our platforms. I don't believe it's widely visible. It's still in the early phases, but people who are provided access will see the interactive app icon from their project, and they're able to then launch the app and then make BCOs from any of their workflows. So to just
And
summarize, question?
yeah, I was just going to ask you a question. I can wait until after the summary if that's better, though.
Yeah, I'm going to finish in about a second, and then
Oh,
happy to take some questions.
yeah, no problem.
Okay. Someone is visiting, so my dog is not happy. Um, but I'll keep going. BCO, so to just summarize, we have multiple implementations of a BCO tool. It can work in many configurations locally, and the most recent configuration is integrated directly within our platforms, and it then can access it'll be available across all of our platforms, and we're very excited about that. So your question was timely, Jonathan. I'm happy to take a couple of questions before I go through the use cases.
Cool. I'm just jotting it down so I don't forget it. Um, so I guess a couple of questions. That's a very cool platform build, and I'm curious about the app. So how does it work? So do you, once you're done, you sort of add the BCO app on at the end, and then it pulls all that data automatically? Is that kind of the workflow?
I'll explain. So one of the things we found on the Seven Bridges platform is that our users wanted to use things like our interactive notebooks. And most analysts, that's what they use every day. So you basically can open our studio right on our platform and then access the data and the workflows directly. So similarly, we extended that feature to add any app. And so we have a way to make a customized interface. So we basically adapted our original BCO app and then made it this new SevenBridges app. And now, so I'll tell you the flow to answer your question. So let's say you finish a run on the platform and you want to document it for submission. You basically would just start the BCO app from the interactive gallery, and then automatically all your projects and workflows will be available. So you could actually select the task that you want to document and then continue with the generation of the BCO, like I showed in the presentation.
Hmm. And so then could you, in theory, be able to move a BCO from CGC to the Seven Bridges platform, for example, and have smooth interoperability?
Exactly. So let's say you wrote so right now we don't let the platforms communicate to each other directly. But what you could do is download the BCO and then upload it to another platform.
Hmm.
And then the BCO app knows how to read a BCO. So instead of doing the generate, you would say load BCO, and it would know what it is. The other thing that's important in our platforms is we can actually share apps, CWL across our platforms.
Hmm.
So it would be possible to then move everything over to another platform. I'm going to talk about that use case soon
Okay.
to talk about how we would do interop.
Okay, cool. Um, if anyone else has questions, please put them in the Q&A. I see that there's one from the second one that came in now too, but the first one is it possible to import JSON to BCO app? I didn't see this option before and not sure if you have implemented this function. Thanks.
So yes, it's implemented. So basically we implemented, I started with the platform, but if we go back a couple of workshops ago, there was the thought that everyone would work from the text or the JSON text. So the simplest option on the app is just to import from the JSON. And that's what I meant by in inputting the text. And then the next level up is to pull in CWL text. So
Hmm.
if you have a text file with the CWL, you can actually pull it up and then start the generation. So I'm just talking about the platform base, but I believe we're supporting kind of the simpler use cases also.
Okay. Um, and so there's one more. Do you have any solutions for people who are using command mode and want to record their activities to BCO? Now it seems like manual input the command to BCO app is the only solution.
So Um,
Is that clear?
potentially, yes. That's a great use case. So it's something I haven't talked about with my team that much, but we now have, let's say you use R or Python and you generate code to do something. We have the ability to save and version Jupyter notebooks and R code. So we could make the R input and the notebook a specialized input. I write BioCompute. It's actually where I'm thinking and where I'm going. So, thanks for the question. I can talk about that near the end on like where do we need to go as a community?
Okay, that's great. And okay, he says awesome, thanks. If there's
So I
more,
have a couple of quick
yep,
questions
go ahead.
for Dennis, and these questions maybe you already kind of answered. So these are coming in through Easy Retro. So uh, some of these questions maybe somebody at your end, Dennis, can answer. Uh, People want to know about tutorials on CGC platform. Where are they? Lessons learned from integrating BCO into SVG's platform, and is manual data entry required?
Tutorials, lessons learned. So yes, so Nan, who was on my team, I'm proud of my team members who I have and who have left. They're all doing great things. Non is set up so that we generate documentation automatically, and there are tutorials. There's a published paper. If you search BCO app and Dennis Dean, you can find the tutorials with a detailed example. We also have tutorials for the CGC. If you can't find them, just ping them. What are the lessons learned? The lessons learned is providing options. And like, I'll give you an example. Although we auto-generate the fields, the ability to edit the fields is really important. and to add. The other thing that I'm starting to think about is really starting with the CWL and our core platform to include the information right from the start so that it could be automatically put into the BCO. A feature we haven't implemented but will come soon is a template where you can pre-populate text for things you're going to reuse, and then you could take that reusable text, like the usability section. Maybe that could be reused for whole classes of workflow.
Mhm.
So a lot of lessons learned, but if it's okay, I will go through two more use cases really simply. They're not completed. And I think that that will spur even more discussion.
That's fine. We do have one more. Would you prefer to just wait for that one for later? We
No,
can.
no, go ahead. I'm here for the
There,
community. Shoot.
there are also a few questions in the Q&A too.
Oh yeah, sorry. The Q&A is what I was referring to specifically. Okay, so I'll ask this last one then, Dennis, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay. This one says, do you have a use case for SnakeMake? And I can say, at least on the BCO community side, that we don't have a use case implemented with SnakeMake that I'm aware of. Do you have one that you're aware of?
Yeah, so it's one of the things about we must have, I think, five different platforms across Europe and multiple places in the country, funded by different institutes and different entities. So we have just about every workflow language use case. And so let me tell you how I'm thinking about it. We started as a CWL platform, right? Like we were part of the original planning. I see Michael Crusoe's on, so he was there right from the beginning. All these languages, so I'm going to get technical for a second. All these languages are context-free languages, standard computer science languages. It should be possible to translate between all of the languages. From a platform perspective, um, we have to bet because it takes a lot of resources to be able to automatically convert. So I don't know that we'll do automatic conversion, but we are just starting to think about how, well, I should say it differently. We have support for multiple languages in um, in development, and I have team members who have really, really good functional prototypes. I think it's something as a community we have to figure out how we support it, but it's definitely feasible. It'll just take a little work.
So I just wanted to touch on that as well. The I'm not sure if the question was expressly addressing BioCompute or if it was addressing the SBG platform and the integrations that you guys have done. So I'm going to answer it assuming that taking the other side of it just as BioCompute by itself and say that we do the design of biocompute in and of itself, like Dennis said, for SBG's purposes and for our purposes, have been to be platform agnostic. So it is able to incorporate examples or uses from any computational language. And we have a tutorial that we're going to put up on our YouTube shortly about using just a raw CWL that is extracted from a biocompute object. And that same paradigm could be used for almost any computational language. If you have the biocompute is a collection of pointers. So if you point to the specific workflow file, script, whatever you want to call it, then it's pretty much the same protocol. You get a link to that file that directs how the pipeline or workflow was run, and then you have a list of all of the parameters and the inputs and what you expect to get at the end.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. And I see a couple more, I think, on Easy Retro, but let's just save those so that Dennis, you can keep going.
Yeah. So it's great. We have discussion. This is what we wanted.
Yeah, it's terrific.
So, just to piggyback on what Hadley said, this is why we have a community, right? Because everyone is going to take a different piece of the problem. as the GW team outlines what they see as the most important use cases, we can then define where do we help. So the part that I'm really interested in is how we scale up, and how do we automate, because that's the things we tend to think about. So if for some reason SnakeMate becomes the thing, we will provide specific support for that. But I actually think Nextflow is going to be the one that's dominating. So more install. Let me go through some use cases. And, whereas the first part, the stuff we did is done and it's usable, but I want to jump into what I see the most important use cases are and kind of how we're approaching it. So these use cases are by no means done, and they're ongoing, but I think it's really important as a community to talk about. So how do we reuse machine learning and deep learning models in a precision or medical application? And so if you search NCI and DOE, they have a collaboration on how to develop machine learning models for cancer applications. And in the top part, there's a whole bunch of pilot projects. And I want to talk a little bit about one of the pilot projects we're starting to collaborate on, and that is the Predictive Oncology Model and Data Clearinghouse. And it's basically MODAC. And MODAC basically says, here are the machine learning models developed by our DOE collaborators. You can reuse them to do whatever you want. Now you can imagine, I can tell you right now that I no longer can just get them up and running. Like I have a team that does that, and they're really good at it. But the question is, how can we make it available to the community so anyone can then reuse those models and get them ported, let's say in a semi-automated way? So we have a pilot study that we're in mid-process in, and so aim one is to how do we transfer the model? Like one model for a very specific example is to say, given a reset, what type of cancer is it? Now that could be really useful if you don't have the original metadata. The second is to develop a procedure for documenting data. In that specific model, there were 30,000 columns in the training set. How do you document that? I'm not sure yet. But we do know we're going to start thinking about interviewing people who helped develop the set. And the third is, how do we do general frameworks? And what I said just a couple of minutes ago, we think about scale, right? Like, how do we get all of these models useful? Like, we can get one or two, but how do we get when there's 100 models ported in a quick fashion? And so this is work by one of my team members, Sonar. On the left side, we basically on the MODAC website, so anyone can download this. There's the models, the configuration files for the models, the training data. He now developed a workflow for transferring those models, and that's in the center, the CGC workflow. So he has a way to configure the models so that he can parallelize them. He has a way to create trained model data analysis reports, and then to do visualizations. So what's the key point here? The key point is if you have the model in this form, you automatically will get best model reports, analysis reports, visualization, and logs. So you have the ability to use the model as is, to retrain the model, or to apply it to data. And the reports are really beautiful. I have to say, I'm not going to show them today. The second part for this discussion is then what do you do with it, right? So let me tell you how we're thinking about this. So as we move the models over to the, let's say the CGC, that's where we're collaborating on this, it's the platform of collaboration, is we want to move towards documenting better. And so we already have an apps gallery. So we see there being a machine learning, deep learning apps gallery, but there'll be a complementary Git page that has all the details. So why is that important? Because I don't know about you, but I won't use a model that I can't go through the details. And it's probably negligent. We ethically have to help people use models appropriate. And so that to do that, we have to allow people to drill down to the details. So we see BCOs as helping with that, right? So if we look at the box at the bottom, we can then, once the model is set up on our platform, we can actually pull all the information into our BCO app, and then generate some of the reports that we spoke about earlier. So these are early days. I don't know that the reports are very useful right now, but conceptually, we're able to do this whole flow now. Another conceptual step forward that we need to be able to do is to have a standard ML workflow. And so this is something that Sonar put together. We have the data and the models on the MODAC website. And then so he broke it down into, a bunch of categories: ETL, feature extraction, model engineering, model evaluation, and workflow apps. So the idea is, taking a page out of computer science, is that there'll be standard interfaces so we can reuse the general workflow, but we can then eventually, over time, use these models in multiple ways. So to just summarize, yes, we can do model transfer. It's not going to be automated, right? Because analysts work differently. For the first model we did, there was an authentication step in the middle of the scripts. So, we're just going to need someone to kind of look at it. But I'm hoping that we can give information or standards to the DOE to say, if you do these type of things, it'll be easier to move in a semi-automated fashion. Um, I mentioned already 30,000 columns. How do you document? Not clear yet, but as we do, I'm on this one. I want to know, how do we do this? Let's do this well. And then I believe we made progress on a standard ML/DL model and data framework. We're seeing machine learning and deep learning models used across all our platforms now. And so we want to make sure that we have tools to make it easier. I'm not sharing those tools yet, but they're really nice. We're going to publish some new ones, I think, at the end of the month. There'll be a CGC webinar. Um, like I said, we haven't solved the problem. The areas to address are technical replicability. What do you do when you have private and sensitive data? Statistical replicability. Can we share data sets, or how different will different data sets results be? These are all research areas. And then conceptually, and I think this is where Jonathan was going, and one of the questions is, we really believe interoperability is going to be important, the ability to share computations across platforms in a distributed fashion to bring metadata together or to do complex analyses. And we see more and more of those use cases every week, every month at SevenBridges. So I didn't give you any answers. I basically said a problem and how we're approaching it. I'm happy to take any questions from the previous section or discussions about machine learning. We're actually doing well on time. I sped up because I have a feeling that we could just have general discussions. So I have one more use case, and then I believe we still will have time for questions after that.
Okay. Well, that's great. So before I ask this question, I'll just mention this might also be kind of a nice time to make use, or maybe not time, but sort of use case to take advantage of the algorithmic error domain. So just to point out that there's two different kinds of error domains. There's the empirical error domain for things that you can test empirically, but then there's also the algorithmic error domain, which is better for the fuzzier things that you might find in like a hidden neural network or random number generators or things like that. So this might also be kind of a cool place to work that in too, just as a general comment.
Can I follow up on that comment? Because I think
Oh,
it's
sure, go
important.
ahead.
So this is where we're going to go in a second. I'll go to the main figure, so I don't preview what we're about to do. Um, but basically, what we think we need to do as a community is actually begin with that, right? Like, what do we do to document as we go? Uh, so maybe I went in the wrong direction. I should have used the same one. But I think this is the idea. So we're thinking that we want test cases built first to test the tool, and then test cases that help compute the error domain, and then the algorithmic domain. This is something our teams at SevenBridges is already doing, but we don't actually share that information. So what I would love to see is that we have classes of tests. We run them both in two different environments. Once we know that the workflow is working well, because results on two different environments is normally a good indicator of success, we can actually take all those inputs and then link them to the BCO in the error domain. Just as an aside, we didn't do this for the BCO challenge, and so I want to do better next time. So I think it's important to figure out how we build in those tests as we're doing the development. So we just add it to the BCO.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, any lessons learned from integrating BCO into SBG's platforms?
So yes, I think the most important part is to think about security. So our original implementation was not integrated with the platform. And we have great security, and our security is improving every week, every month. Well, I can't announce that, but we will have like the highest security ratings available. But really working with our security teams to be comfortable with the app is really important. The second thing is, I'll show you in the next use case. I believe interoperability is going to be the most important things. So thinking about how we have real links, I'm just setting up for the next part of the presentation, I believe is going to be really important. To give you an example, several of our platforms now have the ability to request data or to request a computation or to push a computation on another platform. So how we embed that information and have the ability to reuse it, I think will be important. And then I'll give you one more use case. Um, so the reason I'm going to show you the execution use case, because I can tell you as an analyst, I actually like running things. And I might want to run things with different data, or I might want to modify the data to see what that error domain is. Will it work with a different data set? And so those are the things that I think are the challenges. And I said that was the last one, but I'll tell you one more. We thought a lot about usability and making it so that you don't need a manual to use. So I think most people can just use the app as is and walk through. Um, but I don't think we're where we need to be. I see the ability to generate small reports for specific use cases, like doing something like what are the number of tools and what are they used in this workflow? I've seen use cases with hundreds of tools. So, I think we're going to have to think about how we make BCOs more usable moving forward. Did I answer the question?
Uh, if that did not answer your question, please feel free to let me know, and I'll ask a follow-up for you. In the meantime, how much, let me see, how much manual data entry is required?
So what I love about this tool is almost none. So, well, I'll say it's slightly different. I personally have a bias in documenting the execution domain because I believe if you do that, you can then back kind of um, all of that is done automatically on our platform. Dates, time, size of files. And so I think we're really starting to get to the point where we can document provenance, although that wasn't an explicit goal, that's where we're going. You know, I think it's still an open question on what information is required to make a BCO usable. We allow people to edit as you go. And the idea of our platform is that different people might add different pieces of information.
Hmm.
I want to go back to an earlier slide, not physically because that didn't work. Um, I really love our Microsoft Word template that you could share with people and have them add text that they think it's important. So I see developing a BCO as doing some preliminary work because different people may have different parts of the process and maybe that's an interactive editor, but I think simply sending someone a Word document and say write the usability domain from your perspective, collecting information and then adding it. And I think that this is an important part of our app is that you can interact, you can come back and add information, or over time you may decide that you need to change or modify.
Mhm.
So to just summarize, it's it, all the information that can be pulled, we're pulling automatically. Even the workflow description, we're pulling directly from the workflow, but we're not pulling the use case. So for the usability, you still have to add that information.
I see. Well, that makes sense. And so what about things like optional fields, like in the provenance domain, for example, there's a way to link an ORCID ID. Do they have the ability to do that? That's not required. It's optional if you'd like to do it.
Yeah, so we have a fully functioning editor. You can edit any of the fields. So you could just copy and paste your ORCID ID.
I see.
That's also one of the reasons why we want to have templates. So I could see like someone is responsible for communicating all the BCOs, let's say, for a group. They could pre-configure templates and say, for
Mhm.
the provenance domain, this is what you put in. Links are not accessible because it's private data, for
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
Or we actually have the ability to pull the provenance information.
Yeah.
So I think templates will help over time to reduce the amount of typing that has to happen.
And I should say that's a little bit different from the discussion that's happened in the BCO community about the concept of templates, which has been like a template BCO versus a run BCO, which is, you put hours and hours and hours into building a template BCO because that's the pipeline, you've tested it and hardened it, and you know that it works. And now, as long as your data meets whatever requirements are necessary for that template, then you can run a run BCO, which is much easier. So just wanted to contrast that idea because we have had this idea of a template BCO come up before.
Yeah. So where do you think I got that from? So,
Very
so
good.
isn't that the
Um,
nature of collaboration, right? Like we don't all come up with the ideas. So it's something I want to investigate further in our next round. Like how do we efficiently use templates to reduce typing?
yeah, I see. Okay. Okay, great. And so we have time for one last one before you move on to the next section.
Sure.
It is, can you elaborate on the GitHub submission of BCOs?
Repeat that one more time.
Can you elaborate on the GitHub submission of BCOs?
Yes, I can. So, so one of the things, at least in my role, that I have to think about is how do we help the range of users? We have users who've never written a line of code, and we steer them to the GUI or the graphical interface. And then we have users who will, let's just say, use expletives if they're told they have to use a GUI. They want to use the API, and they do Git processing. Um, and so that's one aspect. So this idea of the range of users. And then there's a second use case that's driving Git. And that is increasingly workflow development is collaborative and there's a great need to version. Now, we version on all our tools, so you can tell the version numbers, but for many analysts, they actually want to look at the code and see what changed. So on Git, it's a lot easier to do. So we could have version 1 and version 1.01, and they could see that, the third parameter was changed. And if we have good process, there's actually a documented, um, reason for that change. Uh, so to answer your question more succinctly, that's the background. We see Git as the way the field is going to collaborate moving forward. Not everyone, but there will be a good number of groups, especially I think it's going to be large pharma and some large academic centers who want to reuse and share their workflows. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, again, if you have a follow-up, please either type it there or raise your hand here or put it in the Q&A here. Um, but I think that's good for now. So if you want to, well, there's one more that came in. Well, I'll leave it up to you. You said that there's more time for discussion afterwards. What's your preference? Would you prefer
Well,
to just
what's
keep
the
going?
question? And I'll see.
Okay, sounds fair. Let's see. I am also wondering the case that if you have many BCOs with similar pipelines or parameter, that you want to compare, are there any tools to highlight the differences by color, different font, etc., or user has to check manually?
So I just love that use case. So I will say one of the reasons for going to Git is that Git tools allow you to exchange and compare versions. And, I would say for the advanced user, so for many advanced users, they do that day in, day out, right? So if they have the BCO or the CWL in text form, most advanced users, very advanced users, know how to make those comparisons. And so we're going with that first with Git supporting it so much because we want the advanced users to drive the community, right? They'll say which features are needed. And then as we see what features are needed, we can then build that into the app. So to answer your question, our BCO app currently doesn't do comparisons, but by integrating our app with current Git-based development, which is possible, you can start to answer those questions. So there's at least a path to do that.
I see. Very cool. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, loving the question, everyone. So please keep them coming. So just one more use case, and this is work we're presenting at BOSC near the end of the week. All my projects, my team collaborates on, so everyone does something. This is something that Jeff has been pushing really hard on, and so thank you for all the figures because I'm reusing all of them. So I've talked about this a bunch, but we are seeing that people just don't want to run workflows anywhere. They have a collaborator who has different data and they want, like this is in my PDXNet consortium, because I can talk about that. We have standard workflows, there's 12 of them to do standard processing, and we're actually moving new findings to human clinical trials. And soon as that's done, there's collaborator X at some institution and say, I want to see if my data predicts the same thing or is it different? I want to rerun these workflows. So 12 workflows is a lot. So it would be great if we could just move all of those over with the BCO and have them be able to execute. For those who've worked with our platform in the past, we had an older version of CWL, and I would even say it was challenging to do that, but possible. But now that we're upgrading all our workflows to CWL 1.0 and above, we're finding it much easier to do that. And I'm happy to answer questions about portability, or even better, Michael is on the call. He can probably jump in too. So I talked about my overall vision for BCOs, but I just highlighted some parts for this section. One is how do we make BCOs interoperable? How do we maintain details on data and provenance? And really, how do we execute? We actually use some of the code that was publicly available and integrated within our app to kind of test this out and see what it looks like. But the goal is how do we um, execute, how do we make sure that all the information we need to execute is within the BCO? I talked about this already. We're going to test, we're going to do multiple locations. And if that's right, we accept or we take all that information and document it within the BCO. Um, as I said, we have actual use cases. So one of our use cases is to do in silico clinical trials. That should be for familial cardiomyopathy. And it's a really great computational platform where there's a bunch of workflows and there's actually 3D simulations of the heart using genetic and clinical information. Really beautiful study. I can't go into great details. So I'm just going to pull out pieces for this discussion. So for our case, the use case is we have workflows that help predict what treatment is going to be done for a particular person. And this computation actually occurs across multiple platforms. So we actually developed the workflows on our European platform, but then the computational team takes those workflows and uses them as input to their computation. So although we did that somewhat manually, I wanted to show that we can do that in a semi-automated process. And the idea, so going back to the lower right, how do we augment our existing infrastructure? because we don't want to change the BCO standard every time. Like I have some thoughts on how we would change the standard to better support computation, but we don't want to wait for that, right? Like we need a standard fix. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we use available information and tooling to support execution. And I'm assuming Mike Caruso Michael might have talked about some of this. So I mentioned there are multiple workflows, but I'm just going to take one piece of it. So the first part of the processing is actually a GATK best practice, and this is output generated from our BCO app. So we're able to pull the workflow from one platform and generate a BCO. And we're using the execution information domain to store the information about the CWL. So here's the link to the raw CWL. Here's the executor. This is the platform that it was run on. And so we're just making assumptions right now. At some point, we might want to support multiple platforms. But once we know this information, we're then able to execute. So just really briefly to summarize, within the BCO app, we can use the execution domain to document everything about the CWL. We can document the executor, which ones they would run on, whether TOIL or CWL tool. These are open, like publicly available executors. There's no reason, well, there's just one point. Right now, we're just thinking about a local execution, but there's no reason why we couldn't expand to an HPC. It's a little more difficult, but definitely doable. And we've done it, like, for example, for the VA, where we moved our workflow and use the scheduler LSF to schedule computation. So to just summarize, yes, we can put enough information to execute BCOs in a somewhat semi-automated fashion. CWL 1 or 1x greatly facilitates portable execution. It's a whole research topic or a different discussion. There are things we can do when generating the CWL to make it portable. Happy to talk about that at another point or collaborate with Michael on this, but we really have to think about how the CWL is generated right from the beginning if we want it to be portable. Like in theory, it's portable, but we want it very easy to be portable. Um, and then, uh, so I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Yes, we can do it. We think it's really important. And it's going to be the place where we start to add more interoperable features. For example, maybe links to data on other platforms or the ability to do a distributed execution. So this is the first step of really thinking about interop within the BCO. With that, I'll open it up to any questions. And so before we do that, let me just thank everyone. Sonar on the left, he does a lot of coding. Jeff really pushed forward the execution project. Christian he developed Shiny app, so developed the whole feature and worked with our team to get the Shiny app. And then two people who are no longer on my team, but very influential. Kaushik on the left, who is now at Google. He really has been developing the advanced user use case, and Nan is just our extraordinary and statistician extraordinaire. He really helped with the first version of the BCO app. And then collaborators at GW and the program managers who funded a lot of this work. I want to give my thanks. So open to questions. So that's what I have for today. So.
Okay. That is terrific. Thank you very much. So it looks like another question has come in. From a user perspective, how long does BCO development take from user input to BCO generation? What are the most common errors that are thrown in the process?
So you can generate a BCO in a few minutes with the app integrated. Like it really takes no time. That doesn't mean it's usable, right? So let's say I'm just going to divide it into two problems. The first problem is what is the information you want to get in there and really think it through? I think that's time consuming and you need a variety of experts to do that. And I think that that's done offline. The tool, once you have that information, you can generate a BCO in minutes. And the tool also supports editing and going back, right? So you could generate a BCO still review a lot of my team's work, and if they gave me a BCO and I read the usability, I still can't use it, you could go back and send it and work on it. It's one of the reasons why I like the Word template. You could say which pieces have to be written offline or by hand, because let's say technically you can't actually pull that information. You need to pull people. You could assign that, align it. That's how we do a lot of things distributedly. We post a document on the web, a Google Doc, and then we tag the 4 people to add information. We edit it. Once we know that, the actual generating the BCO is really fast. It's minutes.
Yeah, and I guess this is sort of a common theme in a lot of development, right? It's learning how to frame the question takes up, like the overwhelming majority of the time. The actual execution's relatively small compared, right?
Exactly. You
Yeah.
just nail right on the head, Jonathan.
Yeah. And so the follow-up for that, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. What are the most common errors that are thrown in the process?
Yeah, so I will say the most common errors, the ones that trouble me. So there are things that keep me up at night. One of them is the random bug from processing a workflow. So let's say, like I think in developing, there was a point where we didn't handle every version of CWL. So the versions were slightly different. So I don't believe we've done this yet. One of the things I want to do is really make sure we have robust support for a wide range of CWL. And then the bug for execution tends to be in the JavaScript, or I have to just explain a little bit about workflows for the participants today. So basically, a CWL workflow has like a graph with tools, but each tool could process the data with JavaScript. Um, and it's that JavaScript that we're finding giving us the most problems. So, so I really want to start thinking through how we standardize that JavaScript so that we know that the translation to the BCO works well towards execution. So let me just state that more clearly. So yes, we can generate a BCO from any CWL. But the real challenge, I believe, is to show that it's reproducible and portable. I think that's a really big win. And to do that, we have to really think about all the components of CWL and standardizing that as much as possible, so that reproducibility and portability is likely instead of, I think right now, a little hit and miss.
I see. There was a previous question a while back that I think was already answered, but just in case, just to give you an opportunity to comment on it if you'd like. Someone was asking about an option for individuals who would like to try the CGC platform for their analysis, like a trial or something. And another comment said that new users get a $300 credit. So it sounds like that's already been answered, but just thought I'd make you aware in case you want to comment on it.
Yes, I'm not looking at the chat, but I'm happy to do it. One of the reasons why I like presenting BCOs on the Cancer Genomics Cloud is that it's meant to be available to researchers. So it's pretty easy to generate an account, and every user starts with like $300 in credits, and you can do quite a lot of analysis. So it's then possible to do workflows and then to try out the BCO app. I have to check with my team. Maybe Sonar can ping me by Slack, but right now I believe you have to be given access to the BCO app. And I would say that it literally was made available yesterday. So we were like pushing to get it done by this talk, but I'm sure there'll be challenges in the beginning. But if anyone is interested in the BCO app, I'm happy to work with them. The code is available. There's a Docker container, so you can try it locally. There's multiple ways to approach. So I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn. So if you just connect with me on LinkedIn or do support at CGC, the message will come to me. So let's see, Sonar responded. He said that the app will be available in a week or two to all users. We're still in a testing phase.
Okay.
But like all apps and new things, I think I really would love the early adopters to use it, right?
Yeah.
Because My team is really good, but like with all new things, there will be challenges. But if anyone wants to try it and see how it goes, just ping us and we'll help set you up when it's more widely available.
That's great. Yeah, thanks a lot. I might hit you up on that myself. Um, yeah, and thank you very much to Hadley for putting a link to the roadmap for the BioCompute portal in the chat box as well. Is there anything more that you want to say about that? Or is that covers it? Okay.
Yeah. Um, I can comment about the roadmap because I've seen the roadmap.
Sure, go ahead.
So, eh, scientific endeavors are about teams now. I saw a great LinkedIn article where they said, get rid of the hero and let's celebrate teams. There is nothing that I do these days that my team isn't influential. So as we think about BCOs, we want to talk about how we support teams and collaborations across organizations. And so I'm really excited about the BCO database where we could now begin to share BCOs amongst each other. For all my public programs, I have to say I am pushing for open access. I want everyone but my friend to have it has to go away. Even with the information, it's sometimes hard to get things running. So how we as a platform connect to databases is going to be important from security reasons because let's say it's our commercial customer, they don't really want anyone access. They might want maybe just the FDA or a subset. So how we think about security is going to be important. And so that's going to be on our roadmap also. Like how do we write not just to Git, but how do we write to the BCO database?
Mhm. Okay, here's one more. Will the users need to have access to the BCO app to ingest a BCO? Interesting.
Mm, Um, I don't know if I understand the question. So
Yeah.
follow up, I'm going to tell you what I think the question is.
Okay.
So we have a BCO app that could we can run the app on platform or off platform, and the app can ingest any text file that it has access to. So if it's on your local environment, anything that you can access from your local environment, you can input. So you can input CWL or a JSON object written as a text file and then re-edit it and I believe resave. I haven't used that use case, but theoretically we can use the input from anything you have access to, if that's the question.
Okay. And so once that's available and you said maybe a week or two to people, they should be able to ingest BCOs using that app or any text file, as you said.
Yeah, so they don't actually have to wait for that. If they find our BCO app paper,
Mhm.
there are links to the Docker container and to the source code. So you
Okay.
could download the Docker container and try it out on your local um, thing. Sonar, you could just ping me if I say something that's not right, just let me know. But we're able to do that or set you up to do that. My only question is what version is actually available. But we have versions that publicly, we may not have like the most recent, but it still should be able to do the things we just talked about.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Please, follow up if that wasn't what you had in mind. Um, okay, so with just, I guess, the last couple of minutes, I do have a quick question about just from myself. You'd mentioned that you had some ideas on how we might improve the standard in some future version, and having worked so much on the standard, I'm curious about what that is, and if you happen to have any of those ready to speak about.
Yeah, so I'm really a fan of explicit. So although we're able to execute the BCO, like I would have loved, like we're just assuming we're using CW tool, L tool. but it might work better for toil for some reason, or that's the only one we tested it. So we don't actually write that information in the BCO. We're making some assumptions in the scripts or the prototypes for executing the information for the BCO. So I think the more detail we can provide, the better. So that's one example. The second example is as we start talking about specific domains, machine learning, image processing, they're going to be very, very similar. So in the beginning, we'll have working standards. So here's the field, this is the information we put in it, and then we can process it. But I could see over time, like there's an extension domain in the BCO. I believe
Mhm.
like there's a good fire example. We might
Mhm.
have to do extensions to better represent image processing or machine learning or even specific applications. For cancers, we want this type of information. So
Mhm.
this tool is suitable for this type of cancer
I see.
with these genetic alterations.
Yeah. Yeah, great idea. Um, and you're right. I should say in the meantime, I think the extension domain would be a great way to address that. But there is one last question that came in. We have 1 minute left. Not sure if BCO fits any data integrity compliances. If not, any plans to get BCO to be certified to fulfill the data integrity standards such as 21 CFR, GDPR, ISO, etc. I think this one's more of a question for our team. I can say that it does comply with 21 CFR, and we did draft some documentation around that. We have not gotten an official certification around that, though. I think that's going to be part of our future. We did, regarding the ISO comment, there were two groups at ISO that were looking to standardize it. I think one has decided not to pursue that since the IEEE standardization, and another one was looking at kind of modifying it a little bit to come up with their own version of it for an ISO. And I'm not aware of the progress on their efforts with that recently. It's been several months since I've had any contact with them. But as far as I know, that's the current status of things related to integrity compliances.
Um,
Anyone else wants to comment before we wrap up?
I want to follow up on that. So
Yeah,
this
sure.
is just so important, especially for our commercial customers.
Mhm.
One of the neat things, one of my favorite things about having a team is that they do different things. So it gives me like a vision or insight into other areas. So Nan, who's pictured on the lower right, wrote what I would say are reporting apps. Um, this is the number of tasks. This is the data that was used. So all kinds of reports. And so in the next phase of the BCO, I would love to be able to say, here's the provenance, and then being able to say that it's compliant with standards would be a huge win for us. And I'll say it from a different perspective. It took um, not for this app. I had a different app certified for use, and it took hundreds of hours. And so, really having the plan for certifying BCOs and different aspects, let's say data, actually worked out, it would make it easier for me because then I can go to our security teams. I can put that as part of our plan, right? We
Mhm.
want this to be certified by this standard. I can say it's going to cost this much, and then we can start to do it. But not knowing that it will be certified puts it way on the back burner for me.
I see. Okay. Well, we're 1 minute, 2 minutes now over. So I'll let everybody go. Thank you very much, Dennis. This was really fantastic. Really appreciate it, and it's so cool to see all the progress that's been made so far. So if anyone else has any more questions, please feel free to reach out to Dennis, myself, or anyone on the BCO team, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.